Welcome, everybody. This is Teresa Schumard, and I am happy to see so many people here today. We are going to discuss COPD and sleep apnea, what is called the overlap syndrome. Next slide, please. We're going to have a little bit of housekeeping here. If you are watching this webinar live, you can type your questions right into the chat box at any moment during the webinar, and we'll go over those questions at the end of the webinar, and we'll have an open mic session near the end. If you are listening to the recorded version of this webinar and watching it, you can send your email questions to asaa@sleepapnea.org. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I agree. Shameless plug, but the gift of sleep is oh so delicious this time of year. And we have the American Sleep Apnea Association strives to improve the lives of anyone suffering from sleep health issues, and we oftentimes consider a sleep issue as simply part of life, but it certainly should not be that way, especially when ignoring the problems we have, severe life-threatening consequences. So these are little coupons that you can buy, or you can ask others to buy for you, but they're little coupons in different denominations. For instance, you would get a full face mask and receive a coupon for one 30-minute nap and a day to sleep in. A $50 donation will provide someone with 6 months of supplies, including a mask, filters, $100 donation, and so forth. You can go to our website, sleepapnea.org, and find the information about the coupons, or you can write us at asaa@sleepapnea.org. So, why not give this gift of sleep during the holiday season? And you can also be helping someone in need with life-saving equipment. You can make a gift in someone's honor also. And you'll be guaranteed your spot on their nice list. Okay, let's go to slide 4. Thank you for letting me plug that. It helps the ASAA continue our work to advocate for patients. Let's have a little vocabulary here. There's an awful lot of information in this webinar, and I wanted to just give you a heads up on some of the things that some of the terms that we're going to be talking about here. And you can always go back to the recording if you want to review these again. Next slide, please. COPD. Well, COPD stands for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. People who suffer from chronic bronchitis or emphysema or both experience compromises to their breathing caused by damage from either or both illnesses, COPD and sleep apnea. So emphysema and chronic bronchitis, it makes it very difficult for the body to exchange oxygen through inhalation and carbon dioxide through exhalation. So without this gas exchange, the chemistry of the blood is out of balance and can lead to a wide range of problems that can impact the organs, the cells, and overall ability by the body to maintain good health and well-being. Those people with asthma and OSA are also said to suffer from an alternative overlap syndrome, because while asthma is no longer considered part of the definition of COPD, its presence with sleep-disordered breathing at night leads to the same respiratory stresses and complications. So overlap syndrome is a term that was coined in the 1980s when pulmonologists began to notice a couple of things, that patients who have COPD or asthma are also likely to suffer from OSA based on the very mechanisms of their daytime breathing problems, which becomes equally evident during the night as they sleep. Patients who had either COPD or asthma, but not asthma in a recent study, still had breathing problems, but they weren't as acute as those with the overlap of both. Slide 6, please. You can see here from figure A on the left, we're showing normal lungs. You'll see the trachea, the right lung, left lung, and the inset pictures the alveoli or air sacs in a detailed view of the lung cross-section. It's the tiny airways of the bronchioles up at the top. And figure B, lungs with COPD, the bronchioles lose their shape and become clogged with mucus. Walls of alveoli are destroyed, forming fewer alveoli, which are you can see that in the inset, the misshapen. Slide 7, please. In sleep apnea, there's measurable collapse of the upper airway during sleep by a variety of means. These results they result in dangerous dips in blood oxygen levels as well as increases in carbon dioxide in the blood. And as we know, carbon dioxide is a waste product of cellular activity, and it needs to be exhaled in exchange for inhalation of oxygen, hence the gas exchange. It's all in order to restore chemical balance to the bloodstream. So a flooding of stress hormones signaled by the brain during apneas, sleep apneas, also creates arousals necessary to encourage breathing again. Otherwise, you would just stay not breathing, and then you know what. But numerous lengthy apneas can create a constant state of stress on the heart, the lungs, and other organs. So the severity of sleep apnea is based on the length and frequency of the collapses of their related arousals. Untreated OSA can contribute to the development still of other problems like diabetes, kidney disease, obesity, and this is without active treatment to correct these problems, or what we call untreated OSA. Slide 8, please. This is a photo of the upper airway, and you can see down at the bottom where the last arrow appears, that's your obstruction when sleeping, because as we're sitting up, we know that we're supposed to keep our airway open. When we lie down, gravity takes over, and the tissues from the upper airway of the tongue, everything can clog this airway up. So no more free breathing there. And I'll just safely say that many of you have heard sleep apnea, or you've been told that you might have it. The loud snoring, gasping, snorting, the moving about, perhaps a relative with a very similar sound and look, a grandparent, maybe an aunt or an uncle. I'm sure you will always remember it, though. You can see the airway closing off, and if you were hearing this person, you would hear no breathing, which is the period of apnea, and it would be followed by a snort as the oxygen levels drop, and the brain is telling the person, snort, snort, you need to breathe. So then the gasping or snorting noise comes into play, and this is known as the recovery breath. And you will notice that the person comes out of sleep sort of slightly. They may not completely wake up, but they they are, brought out of the deeper stages of sleep. And so this is called an arousal from sleep. This happens many times during the night, so sleep is interrupted, and it's thus leaving the person unrefreshed from their troubled sleep. Next slide, please. If we look at the consequences of untreated sleep apnea, we can safely say that research has proven memory loss, impotence, hypertension, headaches, arrhythmias, drowsiness, fatigue, obesity, diabetes, lung hypertension or pulmonary hypertension, heart attack, and stroke. Slide 10, please, Sean. Overlap syndrome. COPD and sleep apnea have synergistic and detrimental effects, and they play very badly together in the sandbox. So their comorbid association leads to compromised gas exchange, the hypoxia and hypercapnia, as we defined earlier, and the high rates of morbidity. And morbidity simply means the condition of being diseased, and mortality, the state of being subject to death. You'll hear morbidity and mortality used a lot, and simply that's what they mean. In the 1980s, a research pioneer in this area, Dr. D.C. Fenley, hypothesized that patients with COPD in whom supplemental oxygen worsened hypercapnia may also have OSA, and called this association the overlap syndrome. Treatment includes the use of nocturnal oxygen therapy, non-invasive positive pressure ventilation, and long-acting medications. There has been a fair amount of studies on improving sleep quality beyond treating the respiratory disease. And, despite the fact that numerous studies show poor sleep quality, a high prevalence of insomnia, and tolerability of newer hypnotic agents in the setting of COPD. Next slide, please. Number 11. In COPD patients, sleep apnea is not uncommon and can further aggravate gas exchange during sleep. A study at Johns Hopkins reported 11% of 265 patients with COPD were referred to the sleep lab. And Dr. Collop writes, these patients demonstrated lower PaO2 and higher PaCO2 during the wakefulness, as well as higher pulmonary artery pressure and more hypoxemia during sleep compared to other subjects. So let's go back. I'm going to go back anyway to your definitions or your vocabulary. Hypoxia is the deficiency in the amount of oxygen reaching the tissues. Hypercapnia is also called hypercarbia and CO2 retention. It's a condition with abnormally elevated carbon dioxide or CO2 levels in the blood. And it's a gaseous product that is normally expelled through the lungs. Okay. We are. Did I lose my place? Okay. And so Dr. Collop said that COPD patients are at risk for overlap syndrome and should be appropriately screened. And oximetry taken during the study shows sawtoothing oxygen desaturation during non-REM sleep. That's the non-dreaming state, with persistently low oxygen saturation levels during REM. Treatment is with CPAP or BiPAP. Next slide, please. So what's the difference between SaO2 and PaO2? Well, do you have too many acronyms in your life or what? The PaO2 stands for the partial pressure of O2 in arterial blood, measured in millimeters of Hg, which is hemoglobin, and the SaO2 is the arterial O2 saturation. Okay, and the pulse oximetry is the one obvious monitoring tool to identify hypoxemia and hypoxia. And then you have the PaO2 in the picture above there, which would stand for an arterial blood gas sample, which I'm sure if you have COPD, you are all too familiar with ABGs. So hemoglobin is a chemical molecule in the red blood cell, and it carries oxygen on specific binding sites. So each hemoglobin red blood cell molecule, if it's fully saturated, can bind 4 oxygen molecules. And then the oxygen molecules then to the tissues when it gets to the tissues when the red blood cell passes through the capillaries. Slide 13, please. Complex interactions between obstructive lung diseases and OSA. This is from a study published in the Journal of Investigative Medicine in 2014. It says sleep affects breathing, particularly in patients with respiratory comorbidities and sleep-disordered breathing, causing daytime symptoms and worsening the quality of life. During sleep, the respiratory centers become less sensitive to oxygen and carbon dioxide, and the breathing becomes more irregular, especially during REM sleep when you're dreaming. The chest wall moves less so that the tidal volume and the functional residual capacity are lower. Sighs, yawns, and deep breaths become limited, and serum carbon dioxide concentration may rise. Next slide, please. Now this is just, we're going to have plenty of webinars on the subject of COPD and sleep apnea, the overlap syndrome. But I wanted to bring forward here just simply, if you are starting out, and you may need this adapter, and it's if you're going to be wearing oxygen at night with your CPAP. There's a very inexpensive online, retailers that you can get this from, and it's really sometimes you can get it from your equipment supplier, the DME. But there are plenty of innovative CPAP masks available on the market that feature an oxygen adapter. If your CPAP mask, and if you can see where I've pointed, I have the pointer there going down. Usually the port is going to be right there, where you can bring your oxygen in. The good news is that these parts are inexpensive, and the parts can be ordered online easily. Just you can do an internet search for O2 adapter or bleed-in adapter oxygen. If you have this special port, all you have to do is connect the tubing, your oxygen tubing. It's really every bit worth the small inconvenience because you will be feeling so much better using all of your therapies prescribed by your physician. If you sense that you might have sleep apnea, you are a COPD patient right now, and you suspect you may have sleep apnea, contact your pulmonologist, and vice versa. I think if you had OSA, and you would already know if you had COPD, but your you have any doubt, you can speak with your physician. Now, slide 15, please. Okay. Always turn on your PAP machine before turning on the oxygen, and always turn off the oxygen before turning off the CPAP machine. This is a safety measure. Some device manufacturers warn that while the oxygen flows into the PAP unit, that it should never be turned on or off. Make sure to read carefully the installation and operation directions when you need to use a bleed-in adapter with your oxygen therapy. And when PAP machines are used with an oxygen bleed-in adapter, the machine should be kept away from sources of heat at all times. No smoking. If you're an oxygen user, you already know this. CPAP machines equipped with a humidifier can also help patients avoid a dry throat, mouth, or dry nose syndrome. This humidifier can be used regardless of whether patients operate a bleed-in adapter or not. So do you wear a cannula while you're awake? If you see, that's number 16, Sean, sorry. You can see right there is where you're going to connect to your mask. Okay. I mean to your oxygen, I'm sorry. Slide 17, step 1. In order to properly connect your CPAP device to an oxygen concentrator, you'll first need to evaluate the type of PAP mask you have. Some masks, like we said, feature an oxygen port. Plus, a capped O2 port allows you to seal off the connector when it's not in use and keep your CPAP system running at full capacity without the hassle of removing the entire connector. Slide 18. After you've located your PAP tubing and mask you want to connect it, wiggle the rubber end of your tubing onto the plastic tube of your mask. Make sure the end is pushed forward while it reaches the first level of indentation on the mask tube. Slide 19, we're kind of going through these quickly because I just wanted to get people familiarized with the process and what you would have to have. But we'll go into this at a later date in more depth. You'll want to secure the opposite end of your PAP tubing, get your bleed-in adapter going there. You can see how it's been connected. These pictures are great. Tanya, one of our associates, did these, and they're awesome. Slide 20, step 4. After you've connected the mask, tubing, and adapter, you'll want to connect your cannula for your oxygen concentrator to the small end of the bleed-in adapter. And number 25, this is how you connect it to your machine. Number 22 slide. So our take-home messages, obstructive lung diseases and OSA are both common and may exacerbate each other. When assessing a patient with COPD, it may be prudent to think about whether the patient also has OSA and vice versa, so discuss this with your doctor. Oxygen therapy lowers the risk of death in patients with COPD, but may worsen hypercapnia and apneic episodes in those with OSA. CPAP is always the first line of therapy for overlap syndrome, daytime hypercapnia, and nocturnal hypoxemia, despite supplemental oxygen therapy or indications for nighttime treatment with PAP or BiPAP, regardless of the presence of OSA. Number 23, do we have any questions? And let's put it on slide 24, Sean. And we are going to open up the mic. Another little message here. You can always ask questions at asaa@sleepapnea.org, and we'll get right back to you. Another shame. Remember your holiday gift of sleep coupons. They're going to be posted today on our website and on our ASAA page on Facebook. Hello, everybody. Do we have any questions?
I'll start off.
Hi. Who's there?
I missed the first few moments of the presentation. Can you redefine hypercapnia?
I certainly can. Hypercapnia. Let me go back to my...
This is John, by the way.
Hi, John. Okay. You said hypercapnia?
That's right. I missed the definition of that.
Okay. It's also known as hypercarbia and CO2 retention. It's a condition of abnormally elevated CO2 or carbon dioxide levels in the blood, and carbon dioxide, a gaseous product of the body's metabolism, and it's normally expelled through the lungs.
Very well, thank you.
You're welcome. Do we have any more questions or comments? Love to hear from everybody.
Hey, Teresa?
Yes.
It's Joe Anderson. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Just fine. Joe is a respiratory therapist, and he's an old friend of mine. I'm so happy you're here.
Yeah, a lot of years. I just want to thank you for, for taking the time to make the presentation. I'm sure that there are people out in the audience that really appreciated some of this information today.
Oh, I'm sure. It's definitely coming up on a lot of research that going to be useful for people.
I hope you're going to do more of these.
We are. As a matter of fact, we are going to do many more on COPD and sleep apnea, but we do some kind of webinar on the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays of the month, and we will be continuing these throughout 2018. Our next one, as you can see, is on December the 27th, and it's patient-centered outcomes and the public voice. How can patients engage? Engaged patients are a superpower, so we need you to be engaged, and so there'll be an interesting talk. Hope you can make it. But again, at noon Eastern time on the 2nd and 4th Wednesday of the month, we'll always be here. So grab your lunch and come and have a time with us.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, this is Carl Stepnowski. Teresa, thanks for giving such a great presentation on the overlap.
Thank you, Doctor. That's Dr.
I'm
Carl.
I'm with the ASAA, and one of the reasons for having this particular talk was because we're working together with the COPD Foundation on a research study that has already started as a project, but the scientific study itself will start up in January. And for the folks on the phone, we did have a focus group a year ago, and I was just curious to kind of throw a couple of questions out there in case people are interested in talking. When we first started the project, we thought that quite a few patients would be using both CPAP therapy and oxygen therapy at the same time, and what we found was quite a few more folks were using CPAP by itself at night, and only probably a lower percentage than we thought were using oxygen therapy at night with CPAP. So I was just wondering if anyone on the phone does use both or is prescribed both, and how they use both therapies and how it's been going. One of the things
this is John, and I have only CPAP without oxygen, and I'm starting to wonder whether I should be using both.
Yeah, have you ever used both together?
No, and I'm going to ask my sleep doctor about that. Being treated for sleep apnea, and apparently successfully, according to many of the results of the daily or nightly studies of my breathing rate and AHI and whatnot, but I continue to suffer some puzzling problems with daytime, not drowsiness, but lightheadedness, occasional coughing fits and whatnot. There's some other things going on other than just the sleep apnea, I believe, and I'm going to want to explore that further, possibly using oxygen.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea to talk to your care team about those kinds of details. What is interesting, the only point I'll make is when we get the metrics from the CPAP device, they provide the apnea-hypopnea index, which is very similar to what gets scored on your sleep study in order to get diagnosed with sleep apnea. But there's two important differences. If you did an in-lab sleep study, they would have included oxygen saturation and then a measure of sleep. And really both of those are needed to score hypopneas. If you did a home sleep apnea test, usually they don't measure sleep, but they do have oxygen. But then when you get the apneas and hypopneas